Hello, everybody. Welcome to next week's Life Podcast. We're going to have a great show today because it is, in fact, am I allowed to say this, Jenna? I don't know. Sometimes I get in trouble. I have my daughter, and she's also a huge, big new executive over at ConnectWise. So she's enjoying her new career. But we thought we'd have a little bit of a conversation and talk about a few things that I think are important to a lot of different people. So, Jenna, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be back. This is my second time.
I know it, and the last one went really, really well. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with this one. So I understand you were on the road. Just to kind of kick this thing off a little bit, you were on the road this week. Tell us what you were doing this week.
I actually was up bright and early at 3 a.m. this morning, and I flew from Tampa visiting a client and through Atlanta and then to Louisville. So I am just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I'm ready for this podcast.
Well, you look happy and you look bright-eyed. So of course I'm biased, but you look great. So Jen, we have some interesting experiences, last year at ECS, and you had mentioned to me that you were talking with Dominic, your son, my grandson, about what Tim Linsenmeyer had been talking about. And I'm kind of curious, what was it that triggered that with him, and what is it that you wanted to communicate with him about it?
It was a really unique question in how it came up. We were in the car, and Dom, who's 12, he's in 7th grade, is super into gaming, right? I'm in his room for inspiration, right? This is not my Groot back here. This is Dom's. But, he was talking about the Oculus and how, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Oculus, right? It's a virtual reality headset that goes on your head and you can use your hands and, you look like you're fighting invisible bad guys. But he asked me if there was any way that the Oculus could be used for people with disabilities, or if people could use the Oculus for things other than gaming, right? He didn't know what could possibly be, but his little brain was kind of working. And I'm not quite sure what prompted it. And I gave him the story about Tim at last year's ECS and how inspiring it was. And it was a good tie-in because his son was also very into gaming, into Xbox, and using those tools that he had to make him feel more comfortable as someone who had a disability, right? He would be able to game with people and they didn't know he was disabled. And Tim was able to translate that experience into true life experience working in a warehouse and using the same sort of thought process as gaming, right? It's very easy. It's something that his son knew. And then to basically put that into work, right? Into a true actual life instance. And so Dominic's little brain was going a million miles a minute thinking how his something that's so important to him, gaming, could be used for people that had disabilities. So it was interesting. Not sure what prompted it, but it was a really great conversation. And it was a good opportunity for me to tell him the story about Tim and his son.
Yeah, the thing. I mean, that's great. I'm really happy to hear that you're having that kind of conversation with Dominic. You're right. His little brain is trying to figure some things out, and that's pretty fascinating for someone who's 12 years old.
Yep.
When you think back on, and it was Michael Walton and Microsoft, along with Tim Linsenmeyer, who is a Microsoft partner from Clover. And there were a few things about that session or segment that struck me. One, of course, was the emotion of it. It was his son.
Right.
And so, when they were talking about artificial intelligence for good, I think is the title of it. And you watch the videos of his son and the incredible capability that basically they empowered these handicapped young people to be able to have jobs and careers and feel good about themselves. The other thing I'm wondering about what you were thinking about was there was no way that, the story was so compelling. There was no way I could say to him, hey, we're out of time. So were you moved? I mean, as much as I was by the way he directed that conversation?
It was incredible. And it made me think how sometimes either inconsiderate maybe or unaware of people who have disabilities and how difficult the normal things that we take for granted can be, right? And I saw this young man who had initiative and the want and the motive to work and go do something, but he was, almost roadblocked a little bit. And to be able to get over those roadblocks, whether it's, through technology or AI or your own personal inspiration and motivation to move forward. But it was an incredible, inspiring story. I don't think there was a dry eye in the house. It was
Yeah,
awesome.
and I'm glad you answered that way because that's really the purpose, I think, for this particular podcast. We sometimes lose some sensitivity because everyone's in such a
Mm-hmm.
magic world of trying to achieve things and get things done and take care of the kids and,
Mm-hmm.
do all the things that people do on a daily basis.
Right.
And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about too was, my own personal situation with my lack of hearing and how that happened, and probably two or three other elements of that. Number one, how did you react as my daughter? How did you react, number two, as a professional? And how did you see the transition from 10, 15 years ago to today, where now these tools are available, some of the things that we'll talk about at ECS. So I'm kind of curious, when you heard, how old were you actually when I had that surgery? Do you remember?
I was in college. I think it was 20, 21.
So after I had it, I know you were in the hospital after I had the surgery
Mm-hmm.
and subsequent to that. So, and for everyone who's listening to the show, it's kind of an interesting story. I'll keep it short. But my wife and I were in a car driving from Phoenix, ironically enough, or from LA to Phoenix, for my father's a surprise birthday party for my father. And we were driving along the freeway, and in California they have those 47-lane freeways. And there was an accident in front of us, and I had to hit the brakes hard because everybody was stopped. And of course, somebody rear-ended us terribly bad. Car was totaled. I got knocked out. We went to Mo was okay, but she obviously was shook up. We went to the hospital in an ambulance. I was knocked out, and they monitored me, watched me, and all of that. And of course, they first said, "Hey, Mo, you're fine. You're good. No concussion." They came back to me and they said, "You're good. No concussion. However, we found something up there that you need to take a look at." And they didn't tell me what it was, but they said you need to get it looked at quickly. So of course we did. I went to the hospital or to the doctor, and it turned out that I had a acoustic neuroma. And for those of you that don't know what that is, that's a non-malignant tumor growing around your stem cord, your spinal stem. And if uncontrolled, it would cut you off and kill you. So the probability of serious injury or death was there. So anyway, they monitored it, and finally I had to make a decision to have the surgery. And like most people, actually I shouldn't say most people, most dumb people like me, I didn't ask a lot of questions, and I just kind of took it for granted that I had to have it. And ultimately I did have it, and of course, Jen, you remember, my face was all droopy and paralyzed, and of course I woke up with no hearing. And so I'm kind of curious, when you saw your father that way, what were you thinking? I mean, were you thinking, what was it that you had on your mind?
When we heard about the accident, it was, oh, you're okay, right? The first, like, all right, mom and dad are okay. And then after the surgery, I did come home. Um, and when I saw you in the hospital, I had a holy crap moment. I think, and many people know you as a big personality and a big smile, and you're always there and you're walking around, and it's part of your DNA, who you are. And when I saw you both in the hospital, but more importantly out of the hospital, when they released you, and you were paralyzed, right? Half of your face, you couldn't walk, your fine motor skills were gone, you needed help up and down the stairs, tying your shoes, buttoning your shirt. It was I wasn't at that point thinking about the long-term effect of, okay, well, now he's 100% deaf in one ear, right? I was thinking about, okay, we got to get over this. And then I didn't even think that there was going to be a disability months, years far out. And at that point, I didn't know I was going to be working for you, right? So as your daughter, I was thinking, all right, I got to help my dad. And then as the years went by and I started to work with you, there was a whole professional aspect of understanding that deafness, but also educating other people around you. Because I went from watching you speak directly to people in front of hundreds of people, thousands of people, directly answering questions right to them. And now you're answering a question that you think is behind you, but the person is to your left, right? And that person thinks you're being rude, or you don't know, he or she doesn't know that you're not deaf in that ear. So it's a whole learning experience for the people that are very close to you. But also it's really up to us to help educate in a professional sense as well, because I can only assume, and I've never asked you this question, but I could imagine it would be embarrassing sometimes to say, I'm deaf, I can't hear you. And I never asked you that question. So I took the responsibility of just telling people, right? Just coming out and telling people he's 100% deaf, you know, in one ear and he can't hear. But I never asked you that question. Is it embarrassing? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's funny you should say that, because it over time, you know, you get a little numb to some of it. You know, like in the beginning, my fear was more, oh my God, you know, I don't have hearing at all on this side. And like you said, I don't know necessarily where the sound is coming from. So I'm always trying to accommodate for that. In the beginning, of course, I was deeply embarrassed. You know, it was a combination of things. My face, you know, my inability to be able to ascertain where the sound was coming from and all of that. And it was really embarrassing because I never had, I mean, you said it, part of my DNA always was, I spoke well, I was quick, I was funny, you know, I was engaged, and I was never embarrassed about being on a stage or with people who, you know, were in a group speaking. Mm-hmm. And so, sure, in the beginning, I didn't really understand, you know, the impact on me or the impact on other people, you know. So like you said, I may have heard a question incorrectly, or I may not have heard anybody at all. Mm-hmm. And somebody would say something like, well, what are you, deaf? You know, yeah. And so you start to, yeah, it's like, whoa, geez, I didn't expect that. And you don't know what to do, you know, at that point, because people mm-hmm. typically are making kind of a joke, you know, yeah. of they don't know your handicap necessarily. Right. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so that was deeply embarrassing. And, but I got over that. You know, I realized that people just don't understand. And over time, you know, you just learn how to deal with it. And sometimes, you know, I have to teach myself to say, by the way, you know, before we have this conversation or we're at a restaurant or whatever, I'm totally deaf on this side and I have lost hearing on this side. Mm-hmm. So that sometimes sets the tone, but sometimes it doesn't work, because people will say, oh yeah, I'm hard of hearing too, you know, or my father's hard of hearing or something like that. And so that gets a little embarrassing, because the definition of deaf, you know, people can't sometimes really grasp it, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. But then that's when I depend on you. So little tricks, you know, little tricks of the trade. You know, when we're out to dinner, especially at a business function, where do I always put you? On my deaf side. Yep. So I'm protected, you know, so yep. That means if somebody wants to talk to me, they're going to have to come through you. Right. And you'll make sure, you know, that basically I'm understanding, right? So little
tap you on the shoulder, let you know. Yeah. There's little things that we can do for sure.
Yeah. So the imposition, you know, I worry about the imposition rather than the embarrassment, you know, because I know if I have to put you in that position, then you know you have an additional responsibility and you're not necessarily, you know, communicating normally. So that makes me feel a little bad. And I think the other thing too is, you know, for people who are hard of hearing, and I know Sarah Henderson's husband has hearing loss, dramatic hearing loss, and other people, and we can relate, so I'll be, I'll try to read lips or I'll try to do certain things. But I think the thing I'm most curious about, when you're speaking to me or because of me, are you that much more sensitive to others' handicaps?
Absolutely. And it's little cues that I think I've learned, right, from you, whether it's if people are deaf, right? You can tell either the way that they're watching your lips or they're possibly leaning in or they're pulling you in closer. So I will adjust either how I'm speaking, where I'm speaking, my how loud I am, right? So there's certain things I think that you're more aware of, that definitely help in everyday life, whether it's personally or professionally, and not just with deafness, right? It's like I was saying earlier, people can be inconsiderate without knowing they're being inconsiderate. And was for sure one of those people. So now, whether you're hearing impaired or, you have a disability, I think if you know somebody that has a disability, whether how severe that disability is, it makes you more considerate of the people around you in everyday life. Absolutely. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, the couple things that you just said are so helpful, right? Being aware of someone's behavior, right? If it's familiar to you, oh, that guy's got a problem. He's
right.
acting like my dad, right?
Yeah.
But it's little things too that I would mention for the audience, who have full hearing or full capability of other senses. And the senses is something else I want to come back to. But when you start looking at people who have those kinds of conditions, the little tricks I find pretty amazing. It really can help the life of both the hearing impaired person as well as the family or friends. For example, like you said, just touch my shoulder. Right now I know. All right. So if somebody's talking to me and I'm not hearing it, it's so much better if you just touch my arm or touch my shoulder, tap me, and I can look, right?
Yep.
Or, other things that I recommend for people who live with hearing impaired people. Don't scream.
Yeah.
Do not scream. Do not yell because it isn't the volume, right? It's the loss. So what you should be doing is move in closer to the good ear, right? And just say, hey, Mike, whatever it is that you want to communicate. That's so much better for everyone because the clarity is there, the respect is there, and frankly, your blood pressure doesn't go through the roof. When someone yells at me from 30 feet away, it has absolutely no consideration. That's embarrassing, and all it does is make the person who's impaired retreat.
Right.
Right? So, for people who are listening on the podcast, I'd really encourage you to Google some of the tricks and tips for people who, and there are things, the National Deaf Association and so on, there are things that they literally provide for people to make it easier for everyone involved. But the other part of it too, Jen, is imagine the influence of technology. So to go back to Tim, I mean, just imagine when I had the surgery, these probably weren't barely in existence, right?
No.
And now what? We get closed caption, I get texting, I can verbally say things and it comes back to me in some kind of caption, some kind of text form. So my hearing aid, everyone laughs. How many people laugh? You laugh. Oh, it's going in his ear. I don't know if he's on the phone. It's going in his ear. So for you guys, it could be funny. For me, it's life.
Yeah.
Imagine I didn't have these kinds of technologies available to me. How much different would my career be?
Right.
Right? So now when you start looking at, when you're looking at artificial intelligence and things like that for ECS, that's the whole Microsoft AI for good becomes critically important. So not only is it a great business opportunity, but it's a huge advantage and assist, for people. So when we get to ECS, I would like to be able to have you and a couple of other people basically manage this kind of a conversation where it's not just AI. It's really what they call it, AI for good. So I'm going to recruit you to help me make sure that we communicate that at ECS.
I think that's a
So,
great message. What I'd like to do is get Dom involved, right? Have a conversation with him because I don't know what prompted him to ask those questions, but I think the younger generation is much more in tune because they have these resources that we didn't, right? So Dom is online, he is gaming, he is connected in ways that I was never connected to, and you certainly weren't. And when you first had the hearing aid in your ear, I think Dom was the first one to understand, like, oh, I have to if he was on your phone, I'll disconnect the Bluetooth so Papa doesn't hear my YouTube videos or whatever he's playing in your ear, right? So I think the younger generation is really going to be where the ideas come from and how to apply them. And it's incredible, even today, what I see Dom in his schools and what they're doing and how they're trying to help. He had a project for his STEM class, and it was for kids that had cerebral palsy and helping them walk assisted in different ways that normally, you think wheelchairs or you think something that's a little bit more kind of outdated. And so they tasked these 12, 13-year-olds and said, hey guys, how, if you had this disability, how would you like to move? How would you like to get around, right? And so they're tasking these younger kids to really start to think about, how can I help, right? Whether it's, communication in a way that we haven't thought about. And Dom, obviously, we're in the military. My husband's in the military. We move all the time, right? He still is connected with kids back in Phoenix from 6, 7 years ago. So this new generation of being connected and using all sorts of tools is going to be a scary generation, but also I think a really great generation to rely on to help people with disability and really start to stretch the limits of what can be done using AI.
well, exactly. And you look at Dom, you're 100% right. So, people around me, if I said to them, do you know what side I'm deaf on?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure you even looking at me can answer that.
When you're driving a car.
But Dominic,
Yeah,
I
I
only had to
know.
tell him once,
Mm-hmm.
right? I only had to tell him once, and he knew what to do from that point on, even when he was 7 and 8 years old. And you're right.
Yeah.
When I got the hearing aid that was Bluetooth, to the phone,
Yeah.
he wanted to play games on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately he knew, oh, I got to disconnect this hearing aid because I'm going
Yeah.
to be listening to the stupid games.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're right. The younger people, I think, are going to have a tremendous opportunity to apply these new sense-based tools,
Mm-hmm.
sight, hearing, and whatever. And
Yeah.
so I have a huge expectation that the next decade or next 20 years is going to bring an unbelievable amount of efficiency to those senses. Probably even touching on how, and I know there's a lot of ethical and moral questions that go with some of those things too.
Mm-hmm.
But now thinking forward, ECS is what, 100 days away?
Yeah.
So
About.
coming full circle, when you really think about it, how can we improve not just ECS as a summit? First of all, I'd like your thoughts on how you think we're doing with it.
Mm-hmm.
But how can we better equip anyone who is handicapped in that room? How can we, knowing some of the things that we know, do you think we should be putting things in place that will, help people who are like me, deaf or other handicaps that we haven't done? And
Yeah.
yeah, go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
please.
Mike. Well, I think so. Two-part question, right? How is ECS doing since I'm not now working with you, right? Gavin, Hero, you guys, Mike have been doing a fantastic job, and I actually was just talking to a couple dealers, and they were asking me how it was going from the other side for me, right? Because they know me and they know that I've helped with ECS in the past. And I said it's fantastic to see what you've done and what you've pulled together, and I help where I can. and being part of the consortium certainly helps, from my perspective and point of view, to be a part of the consortium, be a part of that member group, but also to help as much as we can with ECS and kind of the next generation of thought. And I think more than anything, from now that I'm on the ConnectWise side, right, it's much more high tech. It's much more cyber focused. It's much more, okay, what is out there in the world that's going to affect you personally? Because we live on the internet. We're truly in a digital age. With AI comes vulnerabilities, but also it comes a wealth of possibilities, right? What we can do with it, what we are going to do with it. And to answer your question about ECS and what we can do if people have disabilities, or if they're, they can't read, or they can't, with the vision, or whatever, right? I definitely think there's things that we can do to help. And in the age of digital transformation and being in an industry that we are in, we can certainly tap into the resources that are already available through the dealer channel, through the manufacturers. It's incredible what, like Microsoft and Clover, what they've done, right? You wouldn't even think to put those two companies together, right? A very warehouse dominant company that needed technology and automation tools, and to create something that was so effective, not only to help a next generation of workforce, right, but also a next generation of life, what that's going to look like in the future. So I definitely think that there's things that we can do, be it how we, give out information or distribute information. And also there's a lot of brain power in that room. I am by far not the smartest person in that room, but everybody, like Tim, has a story or an inspiration or something that they can draw onto to help possibly accelerate what AI can do for us in the future. So I would love to see some sort of think tank, or even, leave the business part out of it, because that will come, but more of just like the stories, right? Who do you know that perhaps needs some assistance in their life? And I think from that, you'll develop a lot of really good opportunities for technology and AI to help a really awesome group of people accelerate their life.
So, and that's good input, and I want to try and figure out a way to be able to do that. We have a little bit of time left, I think, to really touch on that in a good and positive way. Now, but I'd like to come back to something else you said too. You're now on the other side, right, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You've got one foot in ConnectWise new stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you still got your toes at least in the imaging channel.
Yes.
And I'm kind of curious now that you've had a little breathing room from the channel. And I know at one point you were a little disenfranchised about being in the channel. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, how are you feeling now about the new and the old, if I could say it that way?
I'm embarrassed to say this because I hate saying it, but you were absolutely right. I was a little disillusioned with with the channel, and just, this is my only career, and it's been a great career. After, in 2005, this is the only channel that I've known. But I think I needed a little bit of change to really reappreciate, right? to really appreciate these business owners, the CEOs, the principals, the people that drive the business on the dealer side, because I now have like I said, I shifted that cube just a little bit, and now I can see these dealers and these employees. They're not copier dealers, right? They're not just slinging boxes and slamming trunks. It's about how to grow their business in a way that continues to make them relevant to also, I was at a dealer this week in Tampa, and what they're doing outside of the channel, how they want to grow their client base, it's incredible. And that's every single dealer, right? Whether it's getting into a more cyber focused environment to really help make sure their clients are safe and protected. It's an incredible thing to watch dealers shift their mindset, hire the right people, get a really good technical guy in there to understand what they want to do and where they want to go, and then to affect change. You can actually see they have an idea, they execute on the idea, And more often than not, 9 times out of 10, they're successful at it. So for me, I'm grateful to have the opportunity. I had a little breather, right? A couple months, ConnectWise, I was kind of in a little bit of a different environment, but still straddling the fence between office technology and kind of government sector. So I really got to take a good pause, appreciate where I came from, but also all of the dealers that have made this channel an incredible career for me, to watch them, to learn from them, and to continue to grow. And I think, I don't even want to say it, but because we don't talk about COVID anymore, but it did give dealers a really good kind of natural take a knee, let's see what's going on, but then immediately pivot, immediately go after a new market, change what they were doing, and continue to be successful. So I think it forced technology, it forced AI, it forced a different mentality, even down to the employees, from dealer principal down, how they work, when they work, and how effective they are when they are working. So I'm very grateful. And you were right. I was a little disillusioned, but I'm not anymore.
Wow, you actually said it. Well, I think you're right. You needed a break, and you got it. It gives you perspective, right? It's funny. Hero and I were talking about some presentations that I have to give, and we're going to get involved with ECS and all that. And I kept telling people, and I kept sharing my thoughts with Hero. I don't even like the fact that we call dealers dealers.
I don't either. I hate it.
It's tired. It's tiring.
I hate
it. I hate it. I get it. I get it. But Hero actually came up with a new name, right? And he calls it the workplace services provider, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not IT, it's not telephony, it's a workplace services provider. And I love that. I actually love that, because if dealers, quote unquote, are going to market to their base, right? Mm-hmm. So they're going to go horizontal as opposed to just constantly adding new clients. So if they're going to be filling all those spaces inside their existing client base, I mean, the opportunity is enormous.
Oh yeah.
And that's where workplace services provider actually shines. It's a great acronym, right?
Yeah.
So help me promote it.
I'll do that. I'll test it out in my social network. See how it
see how it works. Yeah. So my last couple of questions, I have one for you. Do you have any questions for me?
I think I do, right? And I was talking to John Schweitzer just about the state of the industry. I just saw him, yesterday. And, I know there's a next generation, right? And it's above me, right? I still have a lot to learn from the guys that are in between, I think, me and you, right? And what I'd like to know from your generation and kind of the next generation that's a little bit above me is, where do you see a big play for AI in our industry, and how that's going to shape, and I shouldn't say the work, let's call them workplace service providers, how that's going to shape the workplace service providers future, right? How is that going to, are we going to, my fear, right? This is youth talking. I go into a Walmart or I go into a McDonald's and there's automation everywhere, right? I still like being checked out by somebody that's bagging my groceries. I hate going through the self-checkout, but I have to also be very aware that could possibly be the future of the world, is less human interaction, more automation, more AI, and like we said, it's a good thing and it's also a little scary thing. But do you think there's going to be a big play in the workplace service providers?
Well, that's a really great question. Probably we have another podcast just on that. But the quick answer for me is senses. So it's data, it's senses, it's artificial intelligence by its greatest definition, But there are going to be so many things that are going to happen over the course of the next 5 or 10 years, and it's going to be on an accelerated ramp. I mean, what's happening in the technology world is people can't even think about it. They can't even imagine it. But it is happening. And if you use a simple analogy, self-checkout, right? But can you imagine, baby boomers like me trying to deal with self-check? Are you kidding me? But we're forced to learn, right? We're forced to learn. But I actually just read an article about some woman, technology lady, professional, who was talking about the downstream effects of self-checkout. So she very clearly talked about, how these companies are adapting to, right? And how people are adapting to. And she cited this story where, what were the downstream effects for the company? Was their profit up? Were their customers happier to be, versus, like you said, I'd rather have a checkout person. And so what kind of studies were done with that kind of intelligence that forced them or drove them to use and apply these new things? And there's actually very little content. And this lady actually ran her own test. So you know how it's a true story. I just read this. The woman was a technology expert. She went to the store. She had like 5 bags of groceries. She did her self checkout. She put them in her cart and she walked out the door. And you know how Costco, they go, check, 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 check. You got 10 items, 12 items or whatever. So she was walking out and the woman who was checking her out said, "I'd like to see your receipt." And she said, "No, if I'm on the honor system, if I'm working for you, if I'm doing your job and I'm on an honor system that I have to check myself out, then you should trust me that I did it right and I'm out the door."
Interesting.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, that's pretty, that's a little in your face kind of thing. I understand, it could be even a simple accident. But her point was real simple. These are the economies, the economics behind some of the things that we're dealing with, right? And we're going to have to learn how to deal with it. On the census side, the medical field, the data, the use of data, the buying patterns, the e-commerce. We're going to do a whole big thing at the summit on e-commerce. I hear people say, "Well, if you can't compete with Amazon, you'll be dead." Well, I don't believe that, but to your point, where's the opportunity? I think the opportunity literally is in identifying key services that can be leveraged inside your existing client base. And that will include data, it will include buying patterns, it'll include everything that needs to be effective for a less than growing, stagnant workplace, and certainly a changing workplace. So technology, yes. But when you look around, and one of the things that kind of frustrates me a little bit about our industry, on one side, everyone is aggressive, bold, imaginative, and frankly, they want to do the right things. On the flip side of that, I think one of the reasons why ECS is a success is because they can see things that they can sell, grow, and talk to people about it and apply it. So, but the frustration is you got to act, but you can't just jump off the ship. You got to do it with some good thought processes. So, any other questions for me? And by the way, you're in the perfect world, ConnectWise.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. I learn something new every day. It's incredible. It's incredible.
So my last question for you, when you look at it, kind of reverse questions, actually, you're 3 decades away from a baby boomer, right? And now the baby boomers are leaving. So where do you see, how optimistic are you over the next 5 or 10 years that these new, workplace services providers can be successful? Are you bullish on it? How do you feel about it?
I think it's going to be, I love what you said. If we really think about the senses, right, and how we can impact and affect change positively there. I do think, and I don't know if I'm majority or minority here, there's going to be a very delicate balance between automation, artificial intelligence, and also balancing the need and want to have human interaction. I think as we progress further away from human interaction, like for example, I was in the airport today and I wanted to get a coffee, and I was in Atlanta, and to my right I had this, it was a shop, like a storefront, but it all it said was Coca-Cola vending on there. And you literally go in, it was like the honor system, and you pay and you leave. And to my left was, a coffee automation. And I'm thinking, well, I want to say hi to somebody. Like I want somebody to physically take my money, and I want to say, how you doing? So I think it's going to be a balance of progressing that technology. And I think absolutely this industry can do that, will do that, want to do it. But I think there is, I don't even know if it's a generation or a type of person that wants that human element, right? Somebody to pick up the phone, that you're not rerouted a million times, that you're, being talked to and thought of as a human. And I think, I joke a lot. You see me, you hear me say, "Oh, Skynet's coming online," right? I talk a lot about the Terminator and kind of how we live and die and breathe in a connected world, which is awesome. But I think there really needs to be a delicate marriage between the human interaction, because the only way we can help people with disabilities, full circle, or, people that are struggling, is the human part. We still need our brains. We still need to talk to each other. We still need to have that think tank, going back to ECS. You still need the right people in the room to advance that technology. So I think it's going to be a really fun couple of years to see, how we can automate warehouses, how we can take a group of people that can help facilitate, like Tim and Microsoft, right? It's going to be a really delicate marriage. And I think it absolutely can be done. And if any channel can do it, it's 100% this channel.
Well, I love that exclamation point. And Jenna, this conversation is awesome. So it gave us an opportunity to talk about some pretty important things. One thing I as we leave, you grew up in a house of music, right? Mm-hmm. And Sinatra. So I always ask the question, what's your favorite Sinatra song?
It changes every couple months. And it's so funny that you should ask me this. So in a connected world, right? Sometimes if you plug your phone into your car, your music will just automatically start playing. And as I was driving home from the airport, say from Louisville, "Come Fly With Me" just popped on. I plugged my phone in, wasn't even thinking, and it just popped right on. I was like, that's a good one.
It's a great song.
I would have to say, at this point, this season in my life, call it, that's my favorite song at this point. And it just happened to, it reminded me of being young, and you in your stereo system back in the day that was the size of a wall. The speakers were as tall as me, because now our phones are, our music is in our pocket, but back in the 80s you had to have an entire room dedicated to it. But yeah, I gotta say, "Come Fly With Me" right now, that's my favorite song.
Well, I love that song. It's a great song. And again, I think having you and Mike Jr. grow up with music, and now Dom is really enjoying it, and mm-hmm. You got Luca with jiggle, jiggle, wiggle, wiggle, whatever. Hilarious. Yep. Hilarious. So keep the music rolling, because, to me, I think music is the fabric of life, right? So one day it's rock and roll, the next day it's Sinatra. One day it's Tennessee whiskey. Just pick that song and ride it out, because that'll set the tone for the day. So if you don't mind, I'm going to say thank you. If you don't mind, I'm going to say I love you, Jen.
Love you, Dad.
Yep. And thank you for joining me on this really important call. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.